Welcome to this edition of Voices on Main Street. I'm Gary Sutton, just a voice on Main Street. I've been doing talk radio for about 30 years now, over 6,000 shows. And one of the things I like to do is to have conversation and examination. And with this next guest today, we're going to have a lot of examination as we look at the world of politics. He's Eugene DePasquale, who's been a good friend for a long time, I think around 35 years. And I met him when he was the Democratic chairman of the party in York County. He then went on from there to become the legislator for the 95th Legislative District. He became the Auditor General in the state of Pennsylvania. He later on ran for state representative for the 10th Congressional, which he did not win. And then he ran for Attorney General, which he also did not win. So let's see, you're 2-2 so far.
That's right.
In the win-loss column there. But most importantly, 3-2 when it comes to being a great friend. Well, good to see you, my friend. How you doing?
Thanks for having me in. It's always great to see you in person.
Well, Eugene, we'd like to get into the essence of who people are and what they're doing. And when you talk about your name, that's a name that was pretty popular in Pittsburgh for a while. I know you come. I wanted to get at this morning a little bit about where the whole political stuff came for you, because you got to do a lot of politics, policy. How did it all start for you with your family?
So my grandfather was actually elected to Pittsburgh City Council the year I was born.
Okay.
And he started late. I think he was 49 or 50 when he was first elected. So he was mostly a union organizer. And he was also a foreman on a construction site. So, interesting background, but, he was also a Marine that fought in the Pacific. And one of the interesting stories about him is he was going to be on the island of Japan, the invasion force.
Oh, wow.
When the atomic bombs were dropped. And he, would tell the story that when he was a, 19-year-old kid and he heard the story, he thought when they told him what had happened, or they told the whole boat, they thought it was a movie. They couldn't believe that one bomb had done this. And he said at that time he was the happiest person in the world. He later went on, after my dad was wounded in Vietnam, to say that he had his doubts about whether that was the right thing to do. Just as, all those innocent, people that were not military. But, it was just, someone that had a very interesting life. And then he was elected and he served in Pittsburgh City Council for about 20 years.
So where did you get bit by the bug? I mean, you went to what, Pittsburgh Central Catholic? You were actually a pretty good quarterback there, I understand. Someone told me.
Yeah, we actually won the state title. Although when you follow Dan Marino, there's there's a stand. Although I did tie his elementary school touchdown passing record. In 8th grade, we both had 10. But as I say, our careers diverged
a little bit differently.
A bit differently from there. Actually, I would help my grandfather, but the real bug came in 1992 when I was in college. It was my senior year in college, and it was the Clinton campaign. Actually, I was studying in Georgetown that summer and training for the upcoming senior season, and I sort of got bit by the political bug in his campaign.
What was it about that campaign that kind of drew you in?
I viewed it like there was an interesting part of Clinton that, maybe it was the magnetism of him, but there was something that I related to, that he was bringing the Democratic Party back. And you could talk to how life has these circles, that I think we need to do that again, myself as a Democrat, of relating back to the average everyday working person. Growing up in Pittsburgh, and when I say in a neighborhood, I mean, it was a good neighborhood. But, look, I jokingly say half my family was in law enforcement, the other half was on the other side of the law. But there was a lot of people in unions. There was a lot of people that, were in small businesses. And Clinton was the first Democrat, I thought, in a while that really related to, the average person in the street.
We know a lot about Clinton now, that some of which we wish we didn't know, but he had his good side, he had his bad side. I remember covering him in 2000. I was at the Democratic National Convention at the Staples Center out in Los Angeles, and I wanted to see what it was about him, speaking about essence, that made him so attractive to people, kind of the same kind of thing you're talking about. So when I went upstairs, I asked the Secret Service if I could sit behind where he was talking so I could see the telestrator, and I could see people sitting there and what they were doing, how they were reacting to him. Well, I watched he and Hillary pass in the cattle stalls backstage. It was almost like they didn't know each other. She introduced him. It was like one of his final times speaking at a Democratic National Convention. So I sat and watched him. People were like just hanging on every word. And I watched him squeeze. It was almost like watching someone enjoy a fine wine, squeezing every bit of taste out of each word. I saw him again at the President's Cup. I got a VIP thing to go to the President's Cup at Robert Trent Jones Golf Course in just outside of Washington. And I was standing back to back with him, and I heard him talking, and I turned around, and there he is. And I'm watching him talk to this person, and it was like they were the only person on the entire planet. He had that ability to draw people in. It was a shame that the other side was what it was, but there was just something about him as far as being able to draw people in at that particular point in time. It was really amazing what you're talking about.
He certainly had that ability. Somebody said he was sort of like in the political world, the ultimate of the petri dish, which is he was good looking enough, but not super good looking.
Right.
He was educated, highly educated, Yale, Georgetown, but you never got this sense that he was ever talking down to you.
Right.
You never got this sense that there was any judgment in him. That and maybe part of it was his life too, but if you screwed up or you did something stupid, he wasn't judgy to you. And there was this common touch to him, to a guy who was Georgetown and Yale.
Right.
Obviously a highly educated guy. And there was this interesting part where he was Yale and he was Arkansas. And I think there was a bit of him in both. And look, I think he was a very good president. Obviously, he had some very big screw-ups as well.
Right.
But he also enjoyed it. I think he enjoyed the political process. He enjoyed the fight. And I think you saw that when you saw him on the stage.
Well, and I think he had the ability to listen.
Yeah.
And to me, the ability to listen and to actually hear and maybe do something about it, I thought in some ways he became a better Republican than many Republicans were during that time when he's working with Newt Gingrich across the aisle. I remember they did welfare reform. Right. They were doing all kinds of stuff like that. He had the ability to play toward the middle more and understand that people lived more in the middle than they did on the fringes where we are today.
Look, he probably at his core is a pretty liberal guy, but he sort of did get that the country was in the middle. There was another thing that you bring up the Gingrich one because I think there is what we have lost in our country right now. I'm not going to just say politically. I think this is an across-the-board issue, which was Gingrich and he could not have been two different political animals.
Absolutely.
And I'm not even sure they liked each other. But they both were like, we're here, you're the speaker, I'm the president, we have to figure this thing out.
Right.
And we now have this romantic view of, they work together. They fought. It was nasty for a while. But they did come to this middle ground of where there were things that Gingrich agreed not to touch on the Democratic side and vice versa. And we probably had the best economy for a 6-7 year stretch. And this is now something, when you say this out loud, people may think that, we're crazy. When September 11th happened, George W. Bush had a surplus to work with. So obviously the horrible part of September 11th, but there was a reason why the incredible rebuild was able to happen in New York and with the Pentagon and the buildup that eventually happened is that we actually had a government surplus going into 9/11.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. The other thing that was kind of amazing, too, was Clinton left office with a 58% approval rating, as I recall.
That's right.
And so there was something about him that people liked. It was almost like people said, well, we don't care what all the peccadillos were or all the other things were. The economy was doing well. And it always goes back to the idea, if the economy is doing well, guess what? You probably are going to get seen more positively than you would otherwise.
So when the whole thing with Monica went down, and I had a lot of college buddies, center right, center left. And I was just curious, were they just going to be outraged and wanted them out of office? And I remember, one of them, he's now in the financial markets. And I remember thinking he was not a big fan of Clinton in 92. I think he begrudgingly voted for him in 96. And then he goes, I want him in there. He goes, I've never had it so good. And he goes, he did something stupid in his personal life. He goes, that's between him and Hillary. And I remember that's exactly how that played out, which is whether people agreed with the behavior or not. Most people thought it was pretty obscene, but they thought that's not something to remove someone from office.
When you look at this, when you look at Clinton, he becomes maybe a demarcation point. I'm just going to raise this for discussion because that's what you and I do is kind of hang out and just chat. Did that become the time where it was okay to openly do something and the American people kind of forgave you, as opposed to we knew John Kennedy later on was fooling around, but the press didn't come out and say anything about that. And I think it was after Watergate where the press said, okay, school's out now.
The gloves are off. Yeah,
we're now going to come out and we're going to talk about all this stuff, and we're going to see how you feel about it in America, because up to then we had a certain kind of decorum.
Right.
And here Clinton, is in the Oval Office with an intern, and we hear all the stories and the other stuff that came along with it too, with the other people that he had stories with. And so did it become different? Did the press change after that, where the press felt like, we kind of have to guard some of this stuff with Kennedy and so forth? We want people to kind of imagine Camelot is not perfect. Right. And now we said, you're going to get this with all of its blemishes and everything else, and the way we cover politics here in America.
I think that's part of it, but I also just think culturally and media-wise, the world was changing. When you think about Bill Clinton was probably our first 24/7 president.
Okay.
You had headline news, cable news. That was really the beginning of that, where they had to fill the airtime. If you have ESPN, when I go to the gym and you have ESPN on in the background, it's like, can the Lakers survive because they lost one game the night before?
Right.
Because they've got to fill the show. Yep. So they'll have an hour show talking about the Lakers losing. Well, the NBA, they play 82 games, but they got to fill the show. I think part of this was after Watergate, the gloves were off. But also we became a 24-hour news cycle.
Great point.
And they had to fill the time. So what are you going to fill the time with? They had a press conference in the Rose Garden where they announced a new regulation, or are you going to do something that's trying to get eyeballs? And I think, look, at the end of the day, when you're doing this stuff, you're trying to get eyeballs, and if it bleeds, it leads. And so I think you combine with Watergate and the 24-hour news cycle, and then Clinton, I think, gravitated to wanting that type of to and fro all the time anyway. I think that combo is what changed it.
So we come back to you. And we talk a little bit about where you went. You come out of college, and now you're moving on a career.
Yeah.
And you start your career. You became a lawyer, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And then from there, here in York County, you move into the area, and talk a little bit about how you got involved in politics.
So, look, as the joke is that in York County, if you want to be the chair, just wait around a couple cycles because there's only about 10 of us. So you eventually get to be the chair. I think I didn't show up to a meeting or something, and they decided to punish me for not showing up at the meeting. But I happened to be the chair when the whole Charlie Robertson thing went down.
Right.
And I had to be, and it was obviously national news, and we had to pick a new mayoral.
And for
nominee.
people that don't know, Mayor Charlie Robertson, who had been involved in 1969 shootings with Lily Bell Allen and all that, and then later on got found to be somewhat complicit in how that was all handled at that time. He was mayor by then.
He was,
and then so you're here at that time.
He was still the mayor, but he was the Democratic nominee when the whole, I would just say the indictments and all that stuff came down. And he steps down as the mayoral nominee, although still served out the remainder of his term. And I happened to be the person who was the chair of the party that had to pick a replacement candidate. And I think you had known who I was, and maybe but that was where I think politically my life changed, because I went from just being this local county chair in the middle of central Pennsylvania that, because I didn't show up at the meeting, where now I'm doing interviews and we're trying to put together a fair process. And I felt a responsibility to not only pick a new nominee, which turned out to be John Brenner, who I still think was one of the best mayors
did a great job
that the city has ever had, and was probably the right person at the right time to navigate all those waters. And I'm proud that John is a friend, and I'm proud of the job he did and the process we did. But you had a situation where you had to have both a community that had to believe now that you're basically picking the next mayor in a back room. Let's be clear about that. And making sure that the community felt it was an open, fair process, while finding the right person who could navigate what was clearly a racially charged, legally charged, and heading into the next mayoral term where there was this fiscal cliff the city was heading into as well. And so I went from, again, doing an interview every 5 weeks with the York Daily Record to, having every major news outlet out in front of my house outlining how we're going to pick the next mayor. That's where a lot of this changed for me.
Very emotionally charged, too, during that time. But you and I met, and I remember we used to have lunches or a place called A Touch of Italy.
That's right.
We'd meet over there. A little bit of your background. You'd like The Touch of Italy. And we got
was not
Italian
low carb.
food.
It was not low carb.
No, it was not.
And gluten-free was not part of the menu.
It was never part of the menu in those days. And It's been more that way now, but nevertheless, back then it wasn't. But I just remember when I met you. You and I never talked about parties or where we stood, or we just kind of talked, and it's what it was. And I think that was kind of an interesting time because today you have people meet each other. It's like you have to say, well, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm pro-Trump, I'm anti-Trump, whatever, and we go off into these tribes. You and I didn't talk tribal ever. I don't recall ever really sitting down. Not that we never disagreed, but we always did so with respect because we kind of liked who each other was.
First of all, not only did we always hit it off and have great conversations, I view some of that stuff as boring.
Yeah.
I mean, don't you want to get to know? I'd rather know what makes someone tick. I mean, a little bit off, but I find it fascinating that Tom Brady still has a chip on his shoulder for being the 6th-round draft pick. Like, I find that fascinating, right? And I think you and I had similar interests on that. We're both sports guys. And to me, that type of stuff is much more interesting. Like, what was your childhood like? Why did you want to go into talk radio? Why did I want to go into politics? What are these things? Like, we both coached at some level. Like, look, you're helping kids, but the same token, like, we get something out of that too, right? There's a growth that comes of that. And I find that much more interesting than you vote left or you vote right.
Yeah, absolutely right. And so we would talk about issues and kind of gab back and forth. And it gave me a chance to see maybe a different point of view on some of them. Some of them we agreed on. We always had some sports metaphors we could toss in there because what guys do. I mean, that's part of having your guy card. So we did all that.
And by the way, on this note, I think what was the common denominator with us was you may have come at it more from the right. I may have come at it more from the left. But we both cared about the little guy.
Yeah. Exactly.
And
we both cared about a solution.
That's right. And we could look at it and say sometimes the Wall Street crowd is screwing the little guy, whether it's from the left or right. And we had that common bond as well.
I've always looked at things more from who's the person, not so much what's their adjective, or what's their description. You went from there to become the 95th legislative district representative, and you were there for a couple of terms. And I remember you weren't that all popular with your own party there for a while. You kind of came in there, you were a little brash about some stuff, and it didn't sit well with some of the people in the caucus, right?
So I remember I still have the sign from the campaign. So this will let you know, for those of you what it's like when you have kids when you run for office. My son, there was a sign that didn't print out right. So he goes, vote for daddy, he is good. Not great, he is good. I still keep them out. He goes, well, Dad, I was still, keeping you in mind. You can't let it get to your head here.
Right.
And so I had young kids, and I started out in that thing, and I was knocking on doors. I mean, now you see the TV ads and all the other stuff, but that first campaign, that was just shoe leather, going out knocking on doors. And I had what was, I thought, a throwaway promise. I meant it, but she said, Eugene, I'm going to vote for you, but these people in Harrisburg, they forget about us, blah, 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 blah. They do all this stuff in secret, et cetera, et cetera. It was on the heels of the pay raise, and you were one of the ones that was out there on the pay raise, which was obviously just an abomination.
Bad move.
And I said to this woman at the door, look, I get it. You don't trust us. By the way, nothing wrong with that. I'm going to put all my expenses online. So you're going to know exactly what I spend. I didn't think that much of it, other than I was.
That was a pretty good thing.
It's a good thing.
We're being open and transparent and all that.
So the day before Governor Rendell proposes his second-term budget, I put my expenses online. The governor has his proposed budget the next day. Then there's a Democratic caucus for meeting after the speech. He proposed that day 7 tax increases. Mark Cohen, who is now a judge in Philadelphia, who is the caucus chair, so he runs the meeting, says, we only have 2 items on our agenda today. Now, I'm in the room, I'm just some backbencher, just getting started, literally the first week on the job, maybe second week, whatever it was. And he said, we only have 2 items. Number 1 is Governor Rendell's 7 proposed tax increases. And then he says, the second item is something significantly more controversial than Governor Rendell's 7 proposed tax increases. Now, I'm some backbencher. I'm going, man, I won an election.
Stuff coming down here.
This is awesome. Yeah. What is this juice that's coming in? He goes, yesterday, Eugene DePasquale put his expenses online.
Oh, no.
And so if you've seen the movie Animal House, when they put the picture of, is it Bluto, when he's pledging, and they throw all the beer cans at the picture. Flounder. Yeah, they throw all the beer cans and Flounder on the wall. That's what it felt like.
Oh, no.
And let's be clear now. Let's be equal opportunity. I wasn't popular on the Republican caucus either because apparently they had a caucus about it as well. But I will never forget a state rep from Philadelphia who's since passed away. We're walking by, and I mean, when I say battered and bloody, I wasn't, literally bloody. I'm going back to my office, and I'm like going, dear God, they may expel me before I get to vote on a bill here. And he said, DePasquale, he goes, did you make a promise to your constituents? I said, yeah. He goes, did they vote for you based on that promise? I said, yeah. He goes, did anyone in that room vote for you? I said, no. He goes, you keep doing what you're doing. And his point was, they'll get over it. You made a promise. It was a promise you intended to keep. You kept it. And that's why they voted for you.
How about that?
And he goes, they'll get over it. And you know what? That was one of the best piece of advice, politically and otherwise, I ever got.
You're one of those guys, and again, I like to be frank in these kind of things. That's the great thing about podcasts. You can ask anything, and I got you on the line here.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not going anywhere.
You can't go to. You're a captive audience. But anyway, you and I kept on having lunches during that time. You were on my show regularly, and we talk. We agreed on some things, didn't agree on others. I used to kid you, and I to this day I still do. You know what I'm going to say? I used to say, Eugene, I can always tell when you're passionate about something and you really own it, and I can tell when you have to carry the water for the caucus. Right. And that's an uncomfortable thing. A lot of people don't ever have to do that. Right. Talk about that because that's hard sometimes. But I always thought you were terrible at that particular part. You were great when you believed in something and you were passionate about it. You were telling us. But when you had to carry the water,
Look, I'm not saying I'd always make the tackle, but if you needed someone to stick somebody in a football game or try to get you one more yard, or you wanted me to turn a double play, I was your guy, right? I'd give you everything I had. I didn't love returning punts. I did that once. I never wanted, when those four guys are running at you.
Right.
But I did learn, and some people may be uncomfortable with this, is you do have to pick your battles.
Right.
And you cannot fight a war on everything. And one thing I did learn as time went on, and I'd like to think I'm not in office right now, but I'd like to think just as a community I'm a better leader today, is that you do have to pick your battles. And that was something we would talk about is if there was something I was passionate about, it didn't matter if the whole world was against me, I was going to fight for it.
Right.
But if there's 20 issues you're dealing with and you really want to get these 2 or 3 things done, then sometimes, as long as it doesn't violate your moral and ethical code, because you can't fight everything. But the funny part was, I would concede to you, I'm a horrible poker player. You just don't you would tell right away, he's carrying the water on this one, because it was hard for me to go out and sell.
I could tell just because I knew you, right? And I knew who you were, and I knew when you were passionate on something. I was at the Valencia one night. And you and I were both there. It was some kind of public dinner or something like that. And I remember you walked over to me.
Yeah.
And you said, it's a lot worse up there than I thought it was. And I looked at you and he said, what do I do? And I looked at you and because I'm simple.
Yeah.
And I said, you come back with your honor. Yeah. I said, that's all you got.
Yeah.
You come back with your honor. And I remember we talked about that just for a few minutes. But that's always kind of been my answer. And exactly what you're talking about. Did they vote for you? No. Did your people vote for you? Then represent them.
That's right.
That's honor.
That's right.
I mean, that's what you do in that moment when, the whole crowd's coming down on you and saying, well, you're breaking the rules here, kind of, or unwritten rule.
Unwritten, right.
And you didn't do that. I mean, you stayed true to your people. So you go from there and you serve some terms there, and then the Auditor General job comes up. Right. Talk about that and how you got into that.
Well, so reporting those expenses online, in a way, helped pave the way for that, because that was not, again, remember, promise at the door, I'm going to do this. And then what happened was, when I put those expenses online, again, other than being, battered in the room, but every newspaper in the state editorialized on it. And I remember the Philadelphia Daily News, John Baer, who is known as the curmudgeon of the curmudgeons.
He is.
Who has and I say this, John's son was a Division III football player, so we always had that bond, because he would always say, hey, anyone that played Division III football, you had to be a real student and you played the game and you loved it, and it's still college football. So we had that bond over that. But he's the curmudgeon of the curmudgeon. But the headline was, lawmaker sheds a rare light. That was the headline. And that helped give me this reputation, I think earned, that I was someone that, even if you disagree with me, I was going to be open about it. I was going to tell you why I was doing it. You know, you never got a phone call from me that said, Gary, I'm coming on the show, but you can't ask me X, Y, Z.
Right.
You wouldn't have gone along with it anyway, but there was never conditions on anything. And so I got this reputation of an open, transparent person. And I thought that the office of the Auditor General was underutilized. And what I mean by that is, I thought we had a lot of good people, Barbara Hafer, Bob Casey, Jack Wagner, good public servants. Some of them, certainly made mistakes, certainly Barbara did, but they were in that office, they were the watchdog. But they were the watchdog on finances only. And I viewed the office as more than a financial watchdog. That inherent in it being an elected post, that you not only had to make the opportunity of checking the money, but also were you getting the biggest bang for the. So not just making sure that the money was spent legally,
right?
But to me, it was also, was it spent effectively? And I went into it with that approach, and that's why I ran for it. And I'd like to think helped reshape the office for a long time.
You had some pretty big things while you were in there. You had a couple of really big issues. Talk about a couple of those that really stand out in your mind.
So it was finding the 3,000 untested rape kits. And again, somebody would say, Eugene, what does that have to do with money? Well, there was a state program that had the tracking system for the rape kits that no one had ever looked into.
Right.
So we had that. Finding the 58,000 unanswered phone calls at the child abuse hotline. And that was one where, like, to be blunt, that meshed from the Corbett administration to the Wolf administration.
Right.
And so that got, I jokingly talk about this, but this would happen. When Corbett was in and I was the Auditor General, I'd go to the Democratic dinners. Eugene, you get him, you're tough, kill him, blah, 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 blah. Then Wolf gets in and I kept doing my job. And again, a lot of respect for Governor Corbett and Governor Wolf, but people expected me to back off now because we had a Democratic governor and I didn't. And that child line audit was right in the middle of that. No governor wants to be the one overseeing 58,000 unanswered phone calls at the child abuse hotline. But hey, the facts are the facts, and we had to protect our kids. The other one was the state's unemployment compensation system, which was a disaster. And I remember, and that again was under the Wolf administration. And I said at that time, it was about 6 months before COVID hit, I said, this system is being held together with duct tape and bubble gum.
I remember that, yeah.
Okay, and I said, God help us if we have another recession, let alone a depression. And
then here comes COVID.
Here comes COVID,
yeah.
And people couldn't get their money because the system didn't work. And the system is now finally fixed. When Shapiro came in, he said, I ordered my team to review that audit, and they used that really to help change a lot of the system. So if someone does unfortunately lose their job now, they can get the benefits that they paid into the system. And certainly I was one that hammered schools across the board, whether it was a charter, cyber charter, or traditional public. Nobody got a free pass from me.
Yeah, you were out there pretty regularly at that time, and I remember you were talking about a lot of tough issues at those times. So then we move from there. You get out of the auditor job, and you decide that you're going to run for Congress.
Right. Scott
Perry.
Yep.
You and Scott square off, and talk about what got you to that point.
I did believe in 2020, and obviously I announced in mid 2019,
right,
that the country, that someone like myself, Congress could use. Now, the voters eventually going to have that say, but that nobody talked to each other. That there was that stuff that we talk about with Clinton and Gingrich,
right,
that none of that was happening. And I thought that was something that I could bring to the table, that I had this independent streak in me, certainly more left-leaning on issues, particularly on the social issues, economically more down the middle, but I had this approach that I could bring that I thought could help the country.
When you got into that election, what did you learn from that? What did you take away from it at the end?
That when people voted for me for Auditor General, it did not matter. I mean, obviously more Democrats voted for me than Republicans, but you were able to cut through more. When it got to be a federal election, I learned, and I was naive on this, that how many people stay in their camp. That Eugene, I like you, and I think you did a great job as Auditor General, but in D.C., you got a lot of that, and I was naive to that.
So you walk away from that election, you lose to Scott. It was a pretty good election, but you still lost. It was good back and forth. And then the most recent, this past year, you ran for Attorney General against Dave Sunday.
Right.
in one of the most raucous times probably in American history politically. And again, for Attorney General, and what was really interesting, you took your experience as running a state agency up against a guy who had experience as being the DA. And so people had that choice to make. And talk a little bit about what you took away from that particular election.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think, again, it was, I view all the elections I've been in, the ones I've won maybe more favorably than the ones I've lost. But I view each of them as being a good campaign. Even my state Auditor General campaign, the first one, like I still have messages from John Marr and myself, and we competed tough. But I think they've all been done with integrity. I went into that election for Attorney General that I thought more than any other job. Now, again, the voters win a different election. Can't be a crybaby about this. But I thought at this point in my life and with my experience that I thought that was the perfect post for me to serve the public. Yeah,
and of course, Dave Sunday won. He's now the Attorney General. So that brings us to today. Yeah. So where are you at today now? What you're doing now, you become a teacher.
Yeah, teaching at the University of Pittsburgh. I have a private law practice. You have some interesting clients and training for an Ironman 70.3 July 13th in upstate New York, which if you want to talk about a cast of crazies, you want to interview some crazy people, go to the start line of an Ironman.
Now, what's a 70.3?
It's a half. So there's 4 different distances in triathlon.
Okay.
Sprint, Olympic, which is the one you would see obviously in the Olympics, the 70.3, and then the full Ironman. The 70.3 is you swim 1.25 miles in open water, then you bike 56, then you run a half marathon, all back to back to back.
Oh my gosh. I'm dying listening to that right now. So we talk about politics then, Eugene, and this idea of the Trump time, the whole issue right now of this using a law that was meant specifically for wartime, even though it was back in 1798, but it specifically was to be used for wartime. We used it in Japanese internment under Roosevelt, probably one of the darkest chapters in our history. A lot of those people were born here in the United States. American citizens, and they were put in these internment camps. We know some deaths that took care of those camps.
Shameful.
Horrible thing. But you look at this now. So here's Trump saying, I've got an agenda. I'm coming in. I'm going to get these bad guys out of the country. He's done a great job at the border. He's got it down to hundreds of people coming in instead of thousands. And yet at the same time, the judge is saying, well, wait a second. Do you have the right to send them there under this particular vehicle, this law of 1798? Or maybe can I just hold you up for a little bit? Maybe you have the right, but we want to double check it and see. Right. This has been a trend now. Trump acts, judges stop him. Congress nowhere to be heard. You hear the crickets going on there. Talk a little bit about that.
That's my biggest beef here.
Yeah.
So if anybody is shocked that Donald Trump is going to try to use any tool in the arsenal to get his agenda done, then you haven't been paying attention. No. And he basically he has said that's going to happen. So, and the judiciary, again, I know some people on the right aren't happy with it, but I think for the most part they are, because they don't block everything. They block what they think he is going above on the law on. Where is Congress in all this?
Crickets.
You would think that if they are true, they are the co-equal branch, they are the legislative body, you would think they would be weighing in on this. Now, I know a lot of it is political cowardice. I get it. But where is Congress on this? That, to me, is amazing.
I think what's happened with Congress is we've gotten to the point where we play politics, the winning and losing. I always characterize politics and policy as in 2 different places. Politics is the winning and losing of deciding who's going to get there to play the game.
Right.
Who's going to be the policymaker.
And to govern. And who's going
to govern. Now we move into the governing part, which is policy, where we win and win. It's no winning and losing, win and win. No matter if you're Democrat, Republican, you're a citizen of the country, we all try to win. I don't think Congress is able to get off the winning and losing part anymore and get to the policy part. That's the problem. And so they're stymied because we're such a 50-50 place. We're so tribal anymore. We're on the polar ends. Right. We can't really seem to come to that middle area without seeming like we're giving up too much.
So a couple things on this. One is, look, I've often said this, that I think one of the reasons why Trump won the first time was he was on that television show for a decade.
Right.
It taught him how to communicate in the TV format. So he is I'm not saying he is performing 24/7 when the cameras aren't on, but he knows how to play to that camera as good as anybody, at least talking to his folks. But I think it has permeated the whole system now, that they're all performing.
Right.
And if you are, I'm just going to use a Marjorie Taylor Greene, if you try to go out and own the libs and get something on TikTok and then you get 1 million views on that and then you use that to raise money,
right.
And they do it on the left too. This is a never-ending. Who's going to get the best social media feed? Who's going to get and so that's what they get rewarded on today.
Yep.
You get rewarded on, I got 1 million retweets or whatever they call it now on X, and I got 4 million TikTok views. Nobody actually says what they got done. It's all this never-ending feeding the beast of social media, owning the libs, owning the right, who's going to take on Trump, who's going to do this. And none of them ever talk about what they actually got done. And so to me, it's all performative. And that's a problem.
We're talking about making a hit out in the public for a lot of the politicians. Someone once said the most dangerous 10 feet in the world is between Chuck Schumer and a camera. Yeah. That could probably be said for Donald Trump now, right. Marjorie Taylor Greene, all these different people that are out there every day making a hit on camera. And so that's what politics has come down to here. And yet at the same time, we don't seem to be able to, in Congress, get around to actually making good policy. Thus, what we have is presidents who are now ruling by executive order, and on the other side, the judicial branch, which is now coming back and saying someone's got to put a little bit of a kibosh to this and make sure we keep a balance. And meanwhile, Congress sits by idly and not really involved in the whole process.
I actually, one of the courses I teach is called The Challenge of Democracy.
Right.
One of the arguments I make, and the students can rebut, but it's not about left or right. I think Donald Trump politically is filling a vacuum of policymaking that has been delegated from a Congress that has really been doing this for quite some time now.
Right.
I mean, I think that they have allowed presidents of both parties to send troops without congressional approval way too often. I think, if you go back, FDR's first executive order was ordering pencils. That's what he used an executive order for.
Yeah.
Today, they're using the executive orders.
It's
policy.
Right.
And again, this isn't about I disagree with Trump on a lot of these policies, but when I say it's dangerous, it's not because it's Trump. It's dangerous because Congress should be setting the policy. Of course, in negotiation with the president. But when the president does this by executive order, you don't even need to negotiate with the Congress. That is dangerous stuff here. And it's not because it's Trump. It's because Congress isn't legislating.
It's because it's an executive, one person as opposed to the deliberative body of 535 people between the Senate and the Congress. And that's the important part, that we elect those people to get together. And yes, it's a slower process, but it's to make policy as opposed to one person dictating what's going to go on. And it does become, and so then here's where now the court system comes in to interpret the Constitution and saying, all right, you're pushing the edges.
Right.
You're going out there and doing things right now, pushing the edges. And Trump definitely is pushing every day. And I'm not saying rightfully or wrongfully, but I'm saying he's going to go do as much as he humanly can.
Oh, that's right.
And now you have the judicial branch coming along and saying, well, our job is to check that power. Now, is politics in there anywhere? I'd be naive to say no.
Right.
But that's the job that the founding fathers gave us, was to have three separate but equal branches of government and not get too far out of kilter one from another. And I know you teach this kind of stuff. I did too as a history teacher. I get concerned when I see this kind of thing going on every day, where a president's saying, any president, not just Donald Trump, any president saying, this is what we're going to do. And I go, wait a second, isn't that the job of the Congress? They're to make the legislature.
And you can disagree with the judge, but judicial review has been a bedrock of our constitutional democracy for over 200 years. So this is not a new thing, because I've seen a couple of things from Elon Musk. What type of democracy do we have when a judge can say an action of the president is unconstitutional? I said, that is our democracy. That's the system. And, we do have a Supreme Court that eventually weighs in on this. But to me, one of the three branches is not doing its job right now.
I was doing a show at WBAL one morning. The guy came in and he said, Donald Trump is this and that and the other thing, and all the people that believe in him are this and that and the other thing, and every bad word you could say, and all these bad things. So he got to the end, and I had this awkward silence for a second. I said, Tom, I'm going to take a wild guess that you're a Democrat. And he got it. He started to laugh a little bit. And I said, let me ask you from another point of view. Let's assume that everything you just said about Donald Trump, for example, is true. That he's ridiculous, he's all this kind of stuff, and everything, he's outlandish, he's narcissistic, any bad thing you want to say. Let's assume that all of that is true. And he's sitting there, and I think he's getting ready to lap it up. And I said, how ridiculous was your side that he got elected? And all of a sudden, there's a silence. And he said, I've never thought about it that way. I said, How bad were the positions or lack of positions on your side for this guy to now step into that void you talked about earlier? Let's talk about that for a few seconds.
Look, I posted, I have not been super out there since the election.
Right.
But one of them is you can't attack the voters. The answer for Democrats cannot be, let's condemn the voters for who they voted for. How about, God forbid, listen to some of them? And I've tried to do my part. And you look, sometimes you hear things that you agree, sometimes you disagree. But to me, similar conversation, like he is, in my view, a lot of that stuff. And we lost to him twice.
Right.
So you coached, I coached. Watch the film, folks. What'd you do right? What'd you do wrong? Because there was one commentator on MSNBC that said Kamala Harris ran a flawless campaign. I'm sitting around going,
how do you say
and
that?
I'm not trying to knock her as a human being.
No.
But how can you say you ran a flawless campaign when you lost to him?
Right.
It's impossible.
Well, the one thing, and you talk about that, you say, well, I'm like you. I said, and I said on the air, I said, I'm a coach.
Right.
I look at the scoreboard.
Right.
I got whooped. I got to figure out what I have to do.
I got to get my guys better.
Yeah, I got to do something better. One of the things is talk to the American people in a way they understand. He has found a way to talk to people in a way they understand. And now here he is in policy saying, I said I was going to do this. Here I am. I'm doing it. And
there's a couple things.
Yeah.
Let's just remove Trump for a second, me as a Democrat. I think we have to acknowledge, again, you and I weren't in the room.
Right.
But the Biden facade of him being running for re-election, there needs to be an acknowledgement that was a mistake.
Yeah, we screwed up.
That we screwed up. Look, I think Joe Biden had great public service, but he clearly should not have even pretended to run for. I think he actually meant to run, but so there's got to be acknowledgement, guys. We screwed you on that one. That shouldn't have happened. Number two is, and you heard this more from the DC crowd than the man
inside the Beltway, yeah.
But this almost like, oh, this inflation isn't real. You would hear this from the DC crowd. And there needs to be an acknowledgement from Democrats going, you know what? It was real. It was squeezing you. And we've got to be better. Sometimes you can't fix every problem.
Right.
But at least acknowledging it's a problem should have been done. So those two things right off the bat. And three, look, I think a lot of the social injustices, I want to go there for a bit, we're done with the right. So you take like what happened to George Floyd, obviously a disgrace, debacle. That poor guy lost his life.
Right.
That somehow led to we're not going to prosecute retail theft.
Right.
And I'm sitting around going, wait a minute.
Or we're going to defund the police.
It's like, wait a minute. What happened to George Floyd? And there needed to be more training for police. And
no question.
And any cop that does that to another human being, needs to be held fully accountable. And I think the vast majority of Americans agreed on that. But that should not get to you where we're not going to prosecute retail theft and we're going to have this idea of defunding the police.
Right.
And I think there was some of this election was a rejection of that.
Yeah. I think the rejection of the outer polls.
Right.
We have body cameras now for police. Right. That's something that came out of that time.
That's right.
And it's a good thing. And most police who didn't like it now like it. Yeah.
Most of the police like it because it lets you know they were following the procedure.
Accountability. And 99% of those people are going to be out there. And so
we need them to do that.
Right. And but we were leaving out that middle conversation that we have on the streets of America. I don't think we're as wide apart as people would say. I think politics it's like throwing the grenade into the oatmeal room. We kind of don't quite know about that. But if we say, hey, you know what? Where do I go find a good part to fix my car? Right. We're having a conversation. Right. You're going to go do it. And so that's where a lot of the conversation is. Trump figured out a way right now to hit it on people who weren't listed anymore. You listen to the word salad thing that Harris got hit with all the time. Trump wasn't word salad.
No.
And Trump was not afraid to say it in a way. He'd go into a room. He also went to where he wasn't popular. And he'd talk to people and he'd say the same stuff. And people said, well, I don't really like the guy, but you know what? He's coming into the visiting team's locker room and talking.
I will say this till I'm blue in the face. That job in particular, maybe township super, school board, whatever. And I'm not trying to knock that. That's different. That job in particular, I think there's a bunch of people that don't pay a lot of attention to this stuff. That it's almost like a flip of the coin. And in that office in particular, you get credit for showing strength.
Yeah.
You get credit. I mean, think about how many presidents we viewed that actually won that we didn't think had a backbone. It's zero.
Right.
Everyone who gets elected to that job, there's a feeling that you've probably heard it with Bill Clinton and Barack Obama from some people on the right that, you know what, I don't always agree with the SOB, but they fight for what they believe. There is very few times can you say somebody got elected president where they didn't show backbone and toughness.
Let me add a final area today, because we could talk for hours, but final area. So politics today. You know, we've talked about the swamp. We've talked about the status quo. Obviously, there's a move to change the status quo. Half the country's in favor of it. Half the country's maybe opposed to it. I don't know what the actual numbers are. Where are we in politics today, and where are we going from here? Where's next? Because you only have one Trump.
Right.
He's going to be done after this term. Then what?
I do think there'll be at least a potential for a reset then, a potential. But to me, I'm more focused on, at least when it comes to the politics, of trying to get the Democrats back to focusing in on bread and butter, economics, trying to make sure, because there are a lot of people struggling that are paycheck to paycheck, struggling to pay their bills, struggling to get through the week. And how do we help a broader swath of the country get back to having a better shot at the American dream? I think that's what FDR did. You know, and I'm not saying we're in the Depression, but if you are paycheck to paycheck right now, you feel like it's that way. I think as a Democrat, we've got to get back to focusing in on helping people that are paycheck to paycheck, getting a little bit more comfortable so they can feel they have a better shot at the American dream. That, to me, is what Democrats should be focused on.
That's a great point. And I think the other part, too, and you don't hear people talk about this a lot, I want to have two parties that have good conversations that are leading to solutions. I think that's what the American people generally are asking for right now is, do you have something I can sit here and say, yeah, you know what, that makes some sense to me, as opposed to, where is that coming from?
I'm going to give you an example. So we just recently had, and Chuck Schumer and John Fetterman have gotten a lot of flack for this, for voting for. By the way, I get it, right?
Yeah.
I'm here to tell you, I get it. But one thing I want to tell you is, everyone says they should have been against it, which, by the way, I understand that. There was no negotiation.
Right.
To me, maybe I'm the only one. Maybe you and when I say this, you're going to nod. I think the Democrats should have been willing to vote for it under conditions. Hey, Mr. President, we're going to allow you to keep the government open. You need our votes on this.
Right.
You've got to release this money that Congress already approved. You've got to do it's a negotiation. Right. I think if they would have done that, I think a lot of this anger would have gone away. But there was no negotiation.
Instead, we get symbolism, what I'm wearing, my little signs I'm going to hold up. I'm going to sit there and complain about Trump and all that. That's past. Yeah, that's not working anymore. Sit down now and have better ideas and have some ideas that look reasonable to people. When someone says, hey, you're doing a little horse trading here. Yeah, okay, this guy part of the deal, right?
That's how the system. So if, I'm, suspend disbelief, I'm this, Mr. President, you want my vote. There is money that has been appropriated for Pennsylvania universities for research.
Right.
I'm going to tell you, this one is personal to me, okay? I lost a brother to muscular dystrophy. The researcher at the University of Pittsburgh who was researching muscular dystrophy has lost their job.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying Donald Trump won it. I'm not saying he's but put that you want me to vote for your budget? That money that we appropriated for muscular dystrophy research, that money has to put that back in the budget, or I'm a no.
Right.
And by the way, if you go out and tell the American people, I want cancer, these funded, it's at Pitt, Penn State, Temple, name the stuff that got cut. Congress, we appropriated that. Until they release that money, I'm a no on the budget. They release the money, I'm a yes on the budget. I guarantee you there's a big chunk of the country go, you know what? That makes some sense. That makes some sense.
And that's where Fetterman's coming to.
That's exactly.
The John Fettermans of the world are now coming out and they're saying, I understand kind of the argument.
Right.
And it's not on the other end. And John Fetterman's been on some ends with the marijuana and so forth. But for the most part, he's saying, wait a minute, I'm trying to get the best for my people. Right. I'm trying to get the people I represent. And he gets back to the very art of what our founding fathers understood, representative democracy. Right. And maybe it's not always going to be a right or a left decision. Maybe it's just going to be the right decision.
There's nothing wrong with horse trading when it comes to, hey, look, fighting for. That's why we have districts. That's why we have senators. Yep. They're supposed to fight for their district and state. And
both parties ought to be back to coming up with reasonably good arguments that we can take and say, you know what, they're both trying to get to the right place. That's kind of more like the 60s Democrats and Republicans who used to try to do that.
That's it.
My friend, I could go for hours with you, but thanks for joining us today on A Voice in Main Street. Voices on Main Street, you and me today, but it's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks for having me, and thanks for not making fun of my Pirates, even though
I didn't say a word about your Pirates. We Orioles had our time too. It wasn't that good. It's getting better now, but we're getting there. But yeah, Voices on Main Street. I'm Gary Sutton, and thanks for joining us for this episode. Eugene DePasquale, our former Auditor General, here today is my very special guest, and most importantly, good friend.